James once said in a poem about children, when his mother asked him if he was going to marry, and he said, there would be no wife. The little feet that patter here are metrical. Well, if I were to say everything, my family would agree. He meant everything to me. He was part of my life from the time I was from the time I was 19 until today. And he's every bit as real to me now and as much a part of my life now as he was when he was alive. Um, he spread so much of his spirit and affection and intelligence and generosity around him at all times. And I love to soak it up. And I'm fortunate that I still maintain a very strong feeling of connection with him. There's a line in his poem, "You are everywhere beside me." And that's very much how I feel. Having him in the house, reading to them. I have a photograph of him reading Peter Rabbit to my son Zachary. And it was a shock to James to learn that children were read to at meals in my house, because that was not permitted when he was growing up. Apparently, you were either to make conversation with the adults at the table, if there were any, or you were to remain silent and simply use your best table manners. He was charmed at the idea that children could actually be read to. And he read to my children and he sang to my children. Oh, when James came to visit us, we were living in Wilmette, Illinois, and this was 1993. And James had come to give a reading at the University of Illinois, and he arrived in the middle of the school day. So the children came home to find him sitting on the terrace with me. And Zachary told us that for homework, he had a large piece of construction paper, which had to be laid out, and he was to lie down on the paper, and someone was to trace him, so that later on, everything, all the organs and things could be put in the right places and he could put a face on. James thought this was a charming idea, and he very happily traced my son on this piece of paper, which I know we still have rolled up somewhere. Zachary came to me when we received a special numbered edition of 9 Lives, the poem that James wrote that was illustrated by Dorothea Tanning, specially illustrated by her. And the illustrated copies apparently were divided up among those of us who were going to be given a numbered copy. And my son, who could read Roman numerals, came to me and said, "It says 7 here. Who are the 6 people that Uncle James loves more than us?" And I had to explain to him that it wasn't quite so bad, that probably Uncle James got the odd numbers, 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, and that Mrs. Tanning probably got the even numbers. So there were a few people between us and the main event, that being James, and he was relieved. He could figure out that maybe James's mother and maybe Peter and maybe David were all worthy of having a copy, but he was very attached to his. Oh, there's no question that James in my life, both in my head in terms of his poetry and in my life, just kind of walking the path with me of parenthood, made me a much better mother, a much calmer mother, a much more sensitive mother, um, probably a much more tolerant mother, just because when he was around and observing things, he was not unwilling to speak up if he thought that I should be doing something. And it wasn't intrusive. He would say, "Oh, you sing these songs to the children every night. Please make a recording so that when they're grown up, they can listen to the songs that they've heard their whole lives." And um, loved having photographs so that we could catch the children at different stages and ages. Well, once he was staying in Zach's room when Zach was let's see, Zach would have been about 11, and James was staying in Zach's bedroom, and he found some Victoria's Secret catalogs under the mattress. And he came to me and told me what he had found, and he said, "Don't you dare mention this to Zach." And I said, "Okay." It was more of a warning, moms should stay out of this. It was not necessary for me to acknowledge that. And he was certainly charmed at the idea. It wasn't Playboy, it was Victoria's Secret, but it was still clearly something that a young child or a young kid might get his hands on. And James was very enthusiastic about encouraging my children and me to be the people that we were and not to try to change ourselves. I talked to him once about Stephanie and told him that when she was born, I expected a rose. And I told him, I'm afraid that what I got was a cactus, but by jingo, I am going to raise the best cactus I can. And he liked that very much, that she was going to be permitted to be as thorny an individual as she chose. I have little shrines, which have just little photographs, little flowers. I have a candle. I wouldn't say I worship at the shrines, but it is a form of connecting and a form of worship for me. Keeping his spirit alive in the house, and everyone knows that the little objects remind me of James. I have a set of Greek beads. I have an Italian espresso cup. Just little things. James loved the details and being the tactile feel, the look and the color of things. And I certainly learned that from being in his houses, that having little objects on surfaces that would reflect a memory or a person or a period of time was a very good way of accumulating of accumulating good feelings. We tended to talk a lot about feelings. He would let me choose the poems he was going to read if we were if he was reading in the city where I lived, he would ask me if I would like to choose the poems. And of course, I was thrilled to choose the poems. Um, and then he would ask me why I wanted him to read certain poems. And I think it mattered to him to know that the poems resonated to other people, not just to him. Um, Poems that reflected his childhood, um, to which anyone could relate. Um, the kind of life that he describes in Lost in Translation was very much the poor little um, child alone, because he was an only child, in a home with a very attentive mademoiselle. And Lost in Translation is about waiting for a poem, which, as he says, keeps never coming. That is one of my favorite poems, both to read and to teach, because it has so many parts to it, so many different kinds um, of language and symbols and rhythm, and um, reflects James in ways I think that other poems I'm sure do, but not as thoroughly as Lost in Translation does. The memoir that he had that was coming out, he told me how his mother felt about it. She was not wildly enthusiastic, because he was going to say things that she was not keen on her friends knowing. And he said, if they don't know it by now, nothing is going to change their attitudes or their minds, because I think long ago, um, long in his earlier life, his mother was very much objected to his being involved with men in a way that was obvious in the social circles that she belonged in. A different person. Um, he revealed all of his affairs and relationships over a course of many years. And he really knew that his mother wasn't going to like it, but he did say to me that it was his story to tell. And he very much felt at that stage and age that he wanted to tell his story. And I'm so glad that he did. Not necessarily for myself. I knew most of the things he was going to tell in the book, but for future readers of his poetry. And I'm convinced that we will be reading his poetry for many centuries to come. Oh, James in the Kitchen. Many people complained that he would take leftovers and put them all together in a blender and make a sauce. But the truth is that he was he was very interested in food, and he especially liked it when we would pick things out of my garden to eat. When we would, have things that were um, um, obviously root vegetables in the winter, tomatoes and herbs and things in the summer. And nothing I think pleased him more than arriving to find that I had made a sprig of lavender to put on his pillow when he arrived. James at the piano, he was a master. There was a harpsichord and a piano, I think, for many, many years on the top floor of the flat in Stonington. And both David and James played for my daughter and my son and my former husband and me when we were visiting in 1990. My children think of that as the most magical visit. They hadn't heard a harpsichord in person before, and that was very wonderful. And then out on the terrace, um, my daughter collected a lot of shells that the gulls dropped as they flew over, and had a box of shells. And James came to me later and told me he had seen her kissing his bronze statue that was in the garden, which I thought was very sweet. Well, I didn't know what a pillow book was. And James explained to me what a pillow book was and said that even if we didn't have a pillow book, we could have pillow talk. And he was sleeping in our solarium. So when the children were down at night, we would sit together or stretch out together in the solarium, which was a room where surrounded by windows looking out on the beautiful Iowa trees and countryside, and just talk about our lives, what things mattered, what things didn't, um, what we hoped for, what we dreamed of. Um, it was nice. I really want to convey to everyone who is a reader of his work that he was an extraordinary man.